It's now time for our second author showcase of the day, and I'm delighted to be joined by Adrian Blackledge and Angela Creese, authors of Ode to the City and Ethnographic Drama. Edina, Krompák and Stephan Meyer, co-editors with Victor Fernandez-Millat of Linguistic Landscapes and Educational Spaces. And I think we will also have Lara-Stephanie Krause, author of Relanguaging Language from a South African Township School at some point, but there's time for her to pop in, so that's fine. We're going to start off with Adrian and Angela. So if you could go ahead and talk about your book for us.
Hello, this is the book we're going to be talking about, Ode to the City, which is a play adapted from research we conducted in a large city centre library as part of a broader research project. One of the library staff agreed to be a key research participant, and over 4 months we observed her working in the library. We wrote field notes and audio recorded her as she spoke with members of the public and with her colleagues, and we also recorded her during her tea breaks and lunch breaks. At the time we started the fieldwork, the government had made radical funding cuts, austerity measures, and it was announced that the library would cut more than 50% of its staff. The play script focuses on the staff room in the library where 4 library assistants take their lunch and tea breaks. The drama is a creative curation of field notes, transcripts, and audio recordings. It's both fiction and non-fiction. Our colleagues in this session, Lara, Edina, and Stephan, have kindly agreed to help us read the first and the last scene of the play as the 4 characters discuss the funding cuts and face an uncertain future.
They said either you go for VR or you have to apply for your own job.
VR? What's VR?
Voluntary redundancy. Stephan?
Stephan, you're...
Sorry, they pay you off and that's it. You're finished.
Why would you apply for that?
If you don't, you can end up with nothing.
Some of us will end up with nothing either way.
Why is that?
If you've been working for the council for less than 2 years, you don't qualify for redundancy pay.
So what's the point of going for VR then?
Exactly.
Wait, you either apply for VR and end up with no job?
Or you apply for your own job and you might still end up with nothing.
They've got you either way.
But if you've been working here a while, you do get a redundancy pay.
Pay for every year.
How long have you worked for the library service?
Me? 18 years.
So it would be your weekly wage times 18.
Isn't it 1.5 weeks pay for each year after you were 41?
41?
A few pounds more?
Better than a slap in the face with a wet fish.
I don't know, is it?
What's the union doing about it?
Apparently, there is nothing they can do.
The money's run out.
The money's run out. It's less than 18 months since we had Malala.
Malala Yousafzai.
Malala Yousafzai opening the library, unveiling the plaque. What was it she said again?
A room without books is like a body without a soul.
That's it.
A body without a soul. That's what this place is going to be.
We were all so proud. A beautiful building.
The biggest library in Europe.
Award-winning design.
What was the name of the government minister?
He gave a speech.
I remember.
He said the library was an ode to the city.
A symbol of the future.
The future didn't last very long.
They're going to get rid of 100 staff.
100? There can't be more than 200 people work here now.
183.
It's more than half.
More than half.
And you have to apply for your own job. It's not exactly a choice, is it?
Library services used to be a job for life.
Working for the council used to be a job for life.
We don't exactly do it for the money.
Serving the public, isn't it? Helping the public.
You do wonder if the city council has any idea what we do here.
People come here for information.
Get help to find a job.
For that little bit of support.
Like with teaching the children to read.
To apply for a course.
Find out about their ancestors, do their family tree.
Read a book with their children. It makes all the difference.
Some don't even know what they're looking for.
And before they know it, they've found it.
That bit of hope, that sense of direction.
It isn't only the city council though, is it? The government has stopped the grant, cut the grant to the council.
But then again, you go back to why they have to do that. Go back to the financial crisis, and you have to ask who was responsible, who was looking after the shop at that time.
Yeah, but
The most savage cuts to any council in the country ever.
Who was in charge of that mess? It happened on Labour's watch.
It was a global crisis though, a global recession. It wasn't the British government, it started in America.
like the Spanish flu.
On Labour's shift, and you have to ask.
You can't say.
Who was running the council when they decided to invest in a new library they obviously couldn't afford?
I think people are willing to pay. They believe in the library. They pay a few more pounds on the council tax if it means they have one of the best libraries in the world.
When they took that decision, the Tories were running the city. They left it in the lap of the Labour group.
It's something for the city to be proud of. It is a beacon for a city, the jewel in the crown.
Not anymore. Something for the city to be ashamed of.
I wouldn't say that.
A white elephant is what it is.
It doesn't help though, does it? Blaming this lot or that lot.
We can't just sit here and do nothing.
The fact is that 100 people are going to lose their jobs. It could be any of us. It will be 100 people.
We have to fight back. We have to fight the cuts. There's a rally on Saturday, isn't there?
For all the good it will do.
And we move to the final scene of the play at the point where the 4 characters are receiving news on their applications for their own jobs.
What does it say?
I can't even speak.
What is it?
I can't.
What does it say?
Good.
Mm.
It is with regret I must inform you that your application for the post of Customer Experience Assistant does not meet the prescribed criteria.
Oh no. What else?
I wish you every success in your future endeavors.
What? That's it?
It's like you never worked here.
No acknowledgement of your employment?
As if you're a complete stranger.
I can't.
Prescribed criteria?
Future endeavors.
What about their responsibility to you?
I can't.
Mortgage.
No.
Every success.
I know.
What are you going to do?
I can't.
There's teacher training.
I don't.
Those that can do, and those that can't, teach.
What?
My sister says it, a joke. Those that can.
It's not for now though, is it?
What are you thinking?
I'm not.
Is there no explanation?
That was the whole email.
Don't they owe you something?
Surely.
Don't they have to say why you weren't successful?
I don't.
Doesn't make much difference.
They have a duty of care.
You could ask for feedback.
I don't.
You should ask them for the reason.
We know the reason.
Make them say it. They take someone on, they employ someone, they have responsibilities to that person. That's all I'm saying.
You're not going to change it.
They have responsibilities.
I don't.
Everyone is entitled to know.
Did they say when you'll find out about your application?
I got my email today as well.
You did?
What did it say?
Read it out.
I haven't got my phone with me now.
But you,
I got my job.
that's great.
Well done.
Congratulations.
But
They won't consider my request for part-time employment.
They won't?
why?
They didn't say.
What did they say?
We are not able to consider,
That's it.
more or less,
Still, you got the job.
That's good.
but studying will have to wait.
Yeah.
I'm a bit disappointed.
Oh,
I thought it might be an opportunity.
Study?
still you.
Yes,
I'm going to do it.
You?
I'm going to do it.
To do.
teaching?
The library might not want me,
Well,
but teaching,
Go for it.
I'll make myself a teacher.
Are you sure?
I'll be a teacher.
you will.
Jenny says I'm natural.
What?
She says I need to be braver.
I don't know.
Today I got braver.
You'll be a great teacher.
You definitely will.
You'll be an inspiration.
I don't know about that.
You will. You'll show them.
An ordinary teacher.
You will.
You will.
I don't know.
You will.
I'm going to try.
That's the end of our reading. Thank you so much for our press gang volunteers who did it very willingly and very brilliantly. Thank you so much. We look forward to people's questions in due course.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. That was really, really wonderful. We've now got Edina and Stephan who will be talking about their book. Over to you both.
Edina, you're muted.
Okay, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. We welcome you to our presentation about our edited volume, Linguistic Landscapes and Educational Spaces by Edina Krompák, Schaffhausen University of Teacher Education and University of Basel, Switzerland, Victor Fernandez Malat, Georgetown University, US, and Stephan Meyer, University of Basel, Switzerland.
The first chapter contextualizes the studies and theorizes some of the issues addressed in the chapters from various perspectives. It shows how the chapters contribute to the educational turn in linguistic and symbolic landscape studies. And in particular, the findings illuminate the ways in which signs like this multilingual one in an Italian school contribute to shaping educational spaces, and how the spaces in turn shape the meaning and use of the signs. And the chapters also shed some light on the significance of practices in mediating between signs and space. And they draw attention to the relevance of the framing institution in the green frame here, which in our case was education, but could also be extended to other institutions like healthcare or law. Importantly, our focus went beyond conventional schoolscapes. Instead, we sought to draw attention to the broader domain of what we call educationscapes. And as you will see from the images that we will share with you later on, the chapters cover both the linguistic and the symbolic dimensions of educationscapes. We offer a definition of educationscapes that includes both material and social space. In addition, we propose a perspective on educationscapes that is not restricted to the buildings typically associated with schooling, such as school buildings. Instead, we follow the authors of the chapters in that we include in our definition any space in which linguistic and symbolic resources are mobilized for educational purposes. This is, for example, the case in the sign on the left, photographed in a Belgian population registration office, where people are animated to learn Flemish and to use it in their encounters with the authorities.
The chapters in the volume investigate diverse languages such as Chinese, Dutch, English, Flemish, German, Italian, Latvian, Maori, Sami, and Swedish, and covers different geographical areas Hong Kong in Asia, United States of America in North America, Austria, Belgium, Italy, Latvia, the Netherlands, Sweden and Switzerland in Europe, and New Zealand in Zealandia. As the list of the languages and regions in this volume shows, there is a need for research on languages and parts of the world beyond the global north. The book is arranged as follows. 2 synthesizing chapters, chapter 1 and afterward, frame the 11 detailed empirical studies. The 2 perspectives of the relationship between linguistic landscape and educational spaces are reflected in the 2 parts of the book. Part 1 examines the interaction of languages and signs with educational spaces and practices. Part 2 investigates the use of the question in teaching and learning. Now we will whiz through each of the chapters and show you some of the images. You get a flavor of what they are about. Chapter 2 examines the linguistic landscape of a learning club in Vienna for refugees of high school age by using a longitudinal linguistic ethnography. The analysis shed light on the front stage, most visible, and the backstage, mostly invisible practices of the learning club. Chapter 3 investigates the role that the linguistic and symbolic landscape play in an immersion early childhood center in New Zealand in the revitalization of Maori. This study illustrates the importance of the connection between the center and the home across media such as architecture and digital media for revitalizing Maori. The mixed method study in chapter 4 draws on both quantitative and qualitative data to explore the visibility of students' linguistic diversity in the linguistic schoolscape of 12 secondary schools in various parts of Italy. Although the authors observed more than 40 different languages in the schoolscape, Italian clearly dominated. The author's main conclusion is that Italy's local dialects and migrant languages are underrepresented in the schoolscape of the investigated secondary schools. Chapter 4 focuses on the interrelationship between mental well-being and discourses in the neoliberal, institutional, and social context of the University of Hong Kong. Corey Fang Lai Huang shows how the university's neoliberal agenda on the responsibility of students for their own psychological health is manifested in the linguistic and symbolic space of higher education. Chapter 6 examines the revitalization of an indigenous language, Sami, in a preschool in northern Sweden, and the creation of Sami educational spaces in this context. The authors conclude that while the symbolic use of South Sami allows children to develop their cultural identity, this does not reflect on ongoing processes of language revitalization. The last chapter in part 1 investigates the linguistic and semiotic landscape embedded in social practices in Swiss primary school, specifically the display, materiality, and function of the blackboard. The author concludes that the schoolscape represents the classroom community with its own practices and rules. Moreover, Blackboard appears as a heterotopia, that is a space within a space with defined and ritualized functions.
We now come to part 2, which focuses on linguistic landscape as a pedagogical resource for teaching and learning. And this includes language and multilingualism, but it also extends to culture and democratic citizenship, as we will show. So in chapter 8 in this section, explores the way in which Belgian authorities use a language integration campaign, of which you can see a screenshot, to both construct and also to police adult migrants as learners of Flemish. The next chapter discusses a linguistic landscape intervention in a lower primary school in Sweden. In this intervention, teachers use multilingual linguistic landscape activities to foster democratic knowledges and practices as prescribed in this quote from the Swedish national curriculum. The next chapter reports on a mixed methods linguistic landscape project that draws on theories of outdoor learning. It describes the multiple technologies, including digital video glasses, that master students used at the University of Ghent. And here we have highlighted some comments from students on the importance of practical engagement with language in public space. The following chapter examines the presentation of the linguistic landscape within Latvian language learning textbooks. It suggests ways in which books can use descriptions of the linguistic landscape in language learning and teaching. Here we have an example in a book of a picture of a monument, the inscription on the plaque, and a suggestion for a nationalistic folk song that could accompany it. The next chapter is an example of action research in which learners of Chinese at a US college studied the linguistic landscape to enhance their awareness of cultural diversity and authenticity. And here we spotlight a quote from a student whose views on culture developed over time as they familiarized themselves with the linguistic landscape and the practices that accompany it. The book concludes with the last framing chapter by Gorter and Sinners, which focuses on advances in theory and research methods that emerges from the empirical chapters in this volume. In particular, they describe the components and interactions amongst the components that constitute multilingual inequality in public spaces. And they close their contribution by pointing out that the study of digital screens, as they are used in the educational context, is a welcome avenue for further investigation.
This volume contributes to the recent educational turn in linguistic landscape studies by raising questions on the intersection of education and social linguistics, as well on the implication of these interconnections for more than just multilingualism. The volume also theorizes the educationscape and illustrates the potential of applying the central topics and multiple methods of linguistic landscape studies to the specific domain of education. The book integrates diverse perspectives. The chapters illustrate the value of multiple methodologies, such as qualitative and quantitative approaches, by analyzing photographs, interviews, field notes, and participatory video recordings. As mentioned, the volume covers different geographical locations in North America, Asia, Europe, and New Zealand. The studies investigated diverse age groups, from the preschool children to students and adult learners. This volume also contributes to educational sciences and especially to teacher education, by raising awareness of the relation of language and space, and in socially responsible multilingual education. Further, the application of linguistic landscape in education fosters language awareness, outdoor education, and autonomous learning. Moving beyond the typical school context, the contribution of this volume expands our understanding of schoolscape and educationscape as a broader learning context. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Edina and Stephan. And now we're going to have Lara-Stephanie talking about her book.
Yeah, welcome, and it's really nice that I get the chance to speak about this today. It's Relanguaging language from a South African township school, and it was my PhD that I then rewrote, and with the help of Multilingual Matters had it published there. So I'll take you into the, I want to take you into the kind of main argument of the book, but I start by reading one short bit of the introduction. English teaching in South African townships like Khayelitsha is failing. Learners and teachers underperform in standardized English tests and are repeatedly described as cut off from the standard linguistic norms needed for success beyond the township. In my view, this deficit perspective has exhausted its explanatory potential. I wish here to develop an alternative perspective on township English classrooms. So what I argue, I spent 2 years at a primary school in Kailicha Township around Cape Town. And what I argue in this book is that it's not only the South African education system that is blind to the skilled practices of teachers and learners in these settings, but more importantly for our purposes here, we as analysts of language classroom practices have also been blind to those particular languaging skills. So this book basically is driven by a conviction that we've been overlooking something. And our problem, I argue in the book, is that whenever we try to conceptualize, theorize language practices in classrooms, we start even very implicitly these days by the assumption that named homogeneous boxed languages are the norm. Even if we apply translanguaging frameworks, code switching frameworks, very progressive ideas, we still see fluid, heterogeneous language practices as the surprise that we now need to investigate. And this comes from, I argue, a historical conflation of every bit of language with a named language. So for example, if we say the preposition to is an English preposition, or ta is a Swahili future marker, right? So whenever we see a piece of language, we attach it to a named language almost automatically, even if we apply a translanguaging framework. As soon as we look at the data and we write up our analysis, we still carry this ideology with us. And this, so our direction of thought always goes from named bounded languages towards fluidity. And this makes us overlook a central skill, a skill that we can only see if we start our conceptualizations from the idea that heterogeneity and fluidity in language practices is the norm. So our analytical starting point. So if we change our direction of theorization, and this has been said, I mean, this has been argued since the 60s, but the problem is that in our analytical terminology, we always trap ourselves back in that old way of seeing. At least this is my argument. So now, if we turn this on its head, maybe you can imagine a little circle like on the cover of my book. So if you imagine fluid heterogeneous languaging practices here, this is now in my book always the analytical starting point. And you look into an English classroom where you have to get to a standardized code, standard English, which is the target of the lesson, right? So if you go from this direction, this arrow is a very important skill. And we can see this in the Kailicha English classroom, where you have a very heterogeneous repertoire, lots of different languaging resources that students and teachers have to sort out. Like they have to sort out those that do not belong to the standardized code English, and then they have to realize the standardized code English. And then the bottom arrow is where teachers didactically then bring this English back together with all the other resources, for example, to explain something, right? So I'll give you an example. Imagine the sentence "Ndi trainile" here, which is Kailichian morphology with the verb train in the middle. Ndi trainile, I have trained it. So now the next thing the teacher says is, I have trained it, right? And then here the next sentence will be more along the lines of "Ndi trainile." So you will see in the classroom a sorting out of the morphology that does not belong to standard English. "Ndi trainile," I have trained it. And then you'll have again utterances that are in this heterogeneous repertoire. So this process here is a sorting things out that Kailichian teachers and students are extremely skilled at. But now the problem is, this is invisible, right? Because educational authorities test English skills by thinking in named languages, right? They only test the outcome in a standardized monolingual English test. There is no way to test the progression of these sorting skills in the arrow. And we can only make these sorting skills visible if we accept that the starting point is a heterogeneous repertoire, not a named language, right? So if we start to look this way, we can see how many resources actually in that setting have to be sorted out. You have to also imagine that these children have 3 years of mother tongue education, standard Xhosa, for the first 3 years, even though their home language practices are heterogeneous fluid practices. So they have to learn to sort everything into the Xhosa box. After 3 years, they get English as a language of instruction. Now they have to sort everything into that box. And still we go and say, children and teachers in the township underperform and they are cut off from standard linguistic norms. So now the argument in this book is no, there's actually an oversupply of standard linguistic norms. And there's actually a lot of sorting things out going on that is skillful, but that we cannot see. So now I hope to make it visible here, if you're interested in this, by really following teachers through sometimes full lessons, sometimes following little bits and pieces of language and see how they are being used. So that's one. So that's kind of the level of content and the argument. And then at the end, I also develop ideas for assessment of sorting skills, so that this could be actually also a political solution in a sense. And then just briefly till the end, one of the things that is also exciting about this book, I think, is how I got there. Because the problem was when I looked at the data and I wanted to write about it, about the recorded classroom scenarios, I only had vocabulary that would always pull me back into the old perspective. And it's simple things like translation. Translation, when we use it, we assume somehow it goes from one code to another, from one language to another, right? Sorting, invisible, doesn't exist. It's a transfer, right? We have L1, L2, we have Xhosa and English. We have errors and mistakes, which we always measure against one box named language. So what I did then at some point is I just forbade myself to use them. So I just cut out a whole list of terms, including code switching and translanguaging, maybe slightly more controversial, but I explain in the book why. And I just forbade myself to use them, and I looked at the data again. Then I couldn't see anything for a long time. And then at some point I started to develop like a new analytical language that would allow me to think from heterogeneity to homogeneity rather than the other way around. So that's the kind of like thought experiment, self-inflicted word finding difficulties maybe, that is also described in the beginning of the book. So yeah, I guess for more you'll have to read it.
Great. Thank you very much, Lara-Stephanie. And remember, everybody, there is a discount code. So if you want to read any of these books, you can. 50% off with code MMConf50. We do have some time for some questions now. So this first one is for Adrian and Angela. Do you have any plans to perform the text? Obviously, you have just done a great performance for us, but do you have any plans to perform it elsewhere?
We have aspirations to perform the text. Certainly, it's practical matters of time and funding, and of course, the COVID situation didn't help with any kind of theatre productions over the last couple of years, so there tends to be a backlog, but certainly it's the next thing we want to do. Yes. Go.
Well, we have actually performed the text, small bits of the second book, Interpretations, an Ethnographic Drama, which focuses not on the library, but focuses on a Chinese community centre. And we worked with our Chinese students at the University of Stirling to put that on, and we did perform it in front of an audience, and it was an extremely interesting process, and we hope to do more of it. That's obviously, well, yeah, there are different ways of thinking about performance, of course. You know, there's the kind of high art theatre public audience, and then there are also opportunities to use it pedagogically as a teaching tool. And I would say the performance that we did pull together was somewhere in between that, because we did actually put it on locally at the University of Stirling.
Great. Thank you very much, both. I think Anna saw that performance and said it was really wonderful. So
No, she didn't. She
saw something else.
She saw a reading in
She
very
saw
much
a
the
reading.
same
Even
way
that she was
have done now. But this one was the students actually playing the characters across 5 scenes. Do we have?
And there will be a film version, both of the process of rehearsing the play and also we will have a film of the complete production, which we will make available somewhere sometime.
Great, thank you very much, both. So this question goes to Edina and Stephan, and it's asking, how does linguistic landscape work in the classroom differ from earlier work done on the streets?
You can linguistic landscape use as a pedagogical resource to learn languages, and also explore democracy. It was in a chapter 8 by Sullivan et al. And you can also foster visual literacy, because if you study the linguistic signs and the symbols in public spaces, you learn to read these signs, and there is always a story beyond the sign. And this is an important aspect to talk about with students, and to analyze the signs, not only linguistically, but historically and geographically, and explore the local history.
Thanks, Edina. Anything to add, Stephan, or just that sum it up?
I think what Edina touched on was the pedagogical use of linguistic landscape. The other side of the coin, which I can't answer, but which I sort of have a feeling that there's something there, is what we mentioned in one of the early slides, namely that the institutional framework is significant. So maybe earlier linguistic landscapes, which, so to say, went out in the street, were maybe not as sensitive to the institutional framework within which it was set. And I wonder if we will find out more about the impact of a specific institutional framework like education if we start looking at other education, other institutional frameworks, whether that's health or law or transport or whatever. And then we can start comparing those, and then actually we will know more about the impact of the institution.
Thank you, Stephan. This one for Lara-Stephanie. How is relanguaging different from languaging or translanguaging?
Yeah, well, so relanguaging really specifically describes this circular process that I tried to show on the book cover of. So translanguaging focuses, and I'm here mostly talking about translanguaging as it is applied to classroom research inside classrooms when the interactions are analyzed linguistically, because there's also a lot of translanguaging work in other settings that includes, Angela's nodding, like you have written on translanguaging and the body, so which goes somehow into a different direction than the stuff that's going on in the classroom. So translanguaging there really focuses on the transcendence of named languages and what is happening beyond that, without regard for the boundaries of named languages. So my problem was that in the English classroom, that's not really what's going on, because the boundaries of English are highly relevant in the English classroom. So I wanted a concept that puts the spotlight onto the relationality of languaging, as in fluidity, and fixity as the standard language, which is also why the prefix re kind of implies a back and forth, but it for me also implies a relation that is kind of ongoing. So I would say that that is the different, in short, for me, but there's more. Yeah.
Thanks very much. This one for Adrian and Angela. How would you like to see other researchers use your books as a springboard to explore other approaches to writing, or using non-text methods to present ethnography?
Yeah, I think both. I think this approach, this developing ethnographic dramas from research materials is still quite new to us, quite new to researchers generally in this country. There's been some work in the United States, by people like Johnny Saldana and Anna Devere Smith. And so we are always very interested in and slightly surprised by or educated by people's responses to the kind of reading that our colleagues did so well this morning. And whenever the text is read, whenever the play script is read or performed, it always seems different than the previous time. And we find that some people respond to the text as an ethnography, which we see it as, and other people see it as a piece of art, as a piece of theatre, which we also see it as. So I very much think that the Ode to the City and the other two ethnographic dramas we've published with Multilingual Matters can be the basis both for theatre work and for ethnographic work.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I want to add anything. The question was about, was it about writing? Can you just remind me, Flo? Was it about how?
Yeah, so it was how you'd like to see researchers use your books as springboard to explore other approaches to writing, or using non-text methods to present ethnography.
Yeah, well, we would love to see it, I guess, is the short answer. But I mean, I think that yeah, that it's another kind of skill set, really, that I think Adrian has just said we've been kind of working on and developing, and it's a bit like learning any genre. It takes time, I think, and work to make it yours. And we just had a review that came in yesterday. I can't remember which journal it was.
Journal of Sport and Communication.
Sport and Communication. And, yeah, and the author was so interesting. They kind of really picked up on it as a kind of as an ethnographic text. So it was like that. This is what ethnographies should be like, because it provides detail which other ethnographies do not do. I mean, that is the detail of the volleyball was kind of so clear to him in the play script that a typical ethnography wouldn't have been able to achieve. That was really interesting to us. And the other side of it was he's a volleyball player, and he kind of really, I think, for us, helped us endorse our work to kind of see that we had got to the heart of a volleyball activity. So I think writing in this kind of way requires still the kind of core ethnographic training that you would need to produce any ethnography, but on top of that, there's a different kind, learning a different genre to produce it.
Great. Thank you very much, both. This one for Edina and Stephan. The book assembles a diverse range of formal and informal classrooms across an array of languages and cultures. What are the common threads that emerge with regards to how teachers and students use or could use their education scapes?
My first answer is I don't know.
Okay.
Although I wonder if a very helpful term is maybe the one used right at in the final framing chapter of multilingual inequality. So if one could use that concept, the question of equality and inequality as one of the threads that actually runs through a couple of the chapters. But maybe Edina has a better idea.
No better answer, but maybe an additional thoughts. Education scapes expand our thoughts about educational contexts, because it's not only defined as a school context, but also we see education scape in a library or in a museum, and it is important to broaden our geographical scope, what we think about educational context and educational spaces. And also is interesting to involve the multilingual character of language to investigate linguistic landscape or use linguistic landscape as a pedagogical resource. We have some project at the university, at the Schaffhausen University of Teacher Education, where students perform multilingual text, and by using soundscape, linguistic landscape, and also embodiment. And this is also, I think, a tool how you can use educationscape in a broader context. We can't hear.
Muted. This one is for Lara-Stephanie. It's from Abir Ben-Zatita. When I read literature, I sometimes come across scholars using the terms translanguaging and code switching interchangeably. What can you say about that?
That's interesting that you say it that way, because what I noticed is kind of different. I noticed that people say they use translanguaging as something that is very, very different from code switching. But when I then look at their analysis, I realize that they actually use basically the code switching framework. So that's what I noticed. I would be interested in the literature where people say that kind of explicitly. I had the feeling that I had to make that explicit. But what else can I say about that? Yeah, I understand that happens, because I think the trans is tempting because our language ideology is so strong and we're so likely to think in language boxes, to then use the trans prefix not as what it actually is meant to do, as like a transcendence of the separation of codes and languages, but as a trans, as in a transport, what's like going over one to another, is very tempting, right? So this happens a lot. This is part of my argument also, where I say I'll not use the term, even though in some studies it's been extremely useful and extremely politically powerful, but it's tempting to do that. Yeah, but there's much more to say on that. Like the book has a whole long subchapter on the two as well. Yeah.
Thank you. We've actually had a little flurry of questions for you, Lara-Stephanie. So this one's from Amna Salem. She says, in terms of your research findings, what changes will you employ in class?
None at all. None at all. I mean, I'm not the teacher. First things first. Those are the teachers, and the whole point of the study was to say it's not the teachers who have to change stuff. Like it's actually the teachers who do really interesting, really great stuff. Not that there are no problems, I'm not saying that, but in terms of like my focus was really to bring out the strategy that has been overlooked. Their practices are constructed as deficient, as away from standard language norms, as not useful for students, etc., etc. And my argument is exactly that. It's actually not the teachers or the students who are the problem, but it's the way we look at those and the way that states actually measure linguistic performance in a sense. So no, the teachers are the experts here. So no changes to implement in the classroom. That was also not my idea with the study. Yeah.
There's another one. Emaine Bouthadin asks, don't you think that translanguaging happens all the time, even if we restrict ourselves to one named language, let's say English? While we communicate, we are bringing life histories, worldviews, and translate them into a code.
I think we have to be very specific here. It would really depend on which kind of definition of translanguaging you are using. Like you can use translanguaging in a kind of strictly linguistic sense, in a pedagogical sense, or you can use it in a much more open sense where I think your comment would very much apply, where it really includes your life history, it includes what you're doing with your body, it includes all of these things. So it transcends not named languages, but it also transcends language itself. Then again, I sometimes ask myself, why do we then call it translanguaging if it transcends language? But that is maybe another thing. It's also interesting, I'm always asked to talk so much about translanguaging after I talk about relanguaging. So maybe translanguaging might, yeah, depending on how you define it, might be everywhere. Relanguaging is not, though. Like relanguaging happens then when you are institutionally or spatially, through spatial norms, forced to sort out this kind of fluid, free languaging into an institutionalized box. So yeah, I might be more apt to comment on that way, because translanguage, I mean, it's exploding. There's so much. And I think what you're writing can apply to some ideas of translanguaging, certainly, yeah.
Thanks very much. To Angela and Adrian, what are you working on next? What is your next research project?
Next research project. Next research project. I don't know. next writing project. Let me write the next writing project. For multilingual matters. Yes, we have just sent off our manuscript called Essays in Linguistic Ethnography, because multilingual matters have been, well, incredibly generous in all kinds of ways, but in waiting for us really to explain why we have taken the direction that we have taken in our linguistic ethnographic work. And we have purposely held back on that because for various reasons. We didn't want to explain our plays. We didn't want them to become academic texts. We wanted them to stand for themselves as ethnographic reports, as pieces of art, as Adrian just said. So we didn't want to have to explain, which would have turned it into another more academic genre. But also we needed to produce and write the stuff before we were in a position to kind of stand back and look at it. So the essays in linguistic ethnography actually is intended, at least at the moment, is only out for review. So I don't know how it might change, but it's both an account of the direction we've been taking, but also an account of doing team ethnography using work that I have really been learning from Maggie Korbeniova at the University of Leeds, and a project that is called Ether, which brings a relational ethics, philosophical questions into linguistic ethnography. So Adrian and I have actually been working to put those bits together, and we hope they hold up in the book, but it's out for review.
Yeah, one of the shaping principles of the book is the notion of polyphony. That is to say, we're trying to, in our linguistic ethnography work, find ways to flatten the traditional hierarchies of research in which educated academics explain the lives of less educated, typically, research participants. We're trying to retreat from that to give a higher status to the value of the voices we encounter in our research, and limit the authority and status of our own voices and the voices of our colleagues as researchers. And we find that this is one of the ways we've come to theatre, because in the theatre we're not standing there explaining what people's lives mean. We're just showing, and the same with in talking about team ethnography, we raise the status of the voices of the relatively junior, in some cases junior researchers, rather than just being the profs who get to speak on behalf of everybody. That's one of the shaping principles of that book, which we hope will be published in 2023 with Multilingual Matters. Watch this space.
Thanks very much, both. And then the same question to Edina and Stephan. What have you got in the pipeline in terms of research for your next writing project?
Our next writing project is a book about translanguaging, beyond multilingualism, translanguaging in education, with Stephan Meyer and Elena Makarova from the University of Basel. It's based on an international conference with the same title. And we would like to show in our next contribution to the diversity of translanguaging, translingual practices in educational context, and focus also on written translanguaging and also on the interconnection translanguaging and art, translanguaging and music embedded in educational contexts.
Thanks very much. I think we have one more question for Lara, Stephanie. It's from Abir Ben-Setiter again. I'm using Bourdieu's concept of linguistic capital and habitus to refer to the different linguistic repertoire that multilingual users use on their online communication. Do you think that Bourdieu's concepts can be used to refer to the term of linguistic repertoires?
I really might be the wrong person to ask there. Like, Bourdieu is a little bit too far away in my head right now. I mean, from what I remember, I can imagine in terms of kind of like routinized habitus practices that constitute repertoires, and that you would do something with that. It doesn't seem like out of this world for me, but I think you would have to talk to somebody who's more in Bourdieu. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Great. Well, I think that takes us to the end of this session. So thank you so much to all our speakers for joining us. Really appreciate it. We're going to have a break for lunch now.